listening to the Adventure Party for the first week of November 2023. This week, the party take on an endless wave of issues around using disposable enemies in RPGs. The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and radio gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I am Warlord Scar, to whom any one of less than 2+2 hit dice falls instantaneously.
I'm Owen.
And I'm Dave.
And we're here, as you may have guessed, to talk about Mooks in RPGs and the simple fact of how the average Joe, with a rusty knife and a tin pot helmet, what effect they have on your gaming experience, and are they maybe being overplayed or underplayed in the average game? Thoughts, gentlemen? General thoughts?
Particularly low level or weak bad guys are typically fodder wheat before the scythe that is a competently built player character. Generally speaking, mooks scale poorly and exist to be knocked down in dramatic or funny fashion. They're mechanically often not terribly interesting. They often don't have a lot going on. They're kind of classically characterized as fodder. If you did a fantasy universe, they're goblins, they're kobolds. In a more straight laced, they're the town guard who exist to be slaughtered in chapter 3. In a hi-fi setting, they're usually the troops of some vaguely imperial army or other one who die quickly. I mean, like, stormtroopers are technically meant to be elite troops, but they usually fulfill the role of mooks in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Their lives are short, brutal, nasty, and usually without even seeing their faces.
Yeah.
Until their outfits stripped off and used as a disguise by the heroes.
Pretty much, life is not good for a mook. Life is not good for a mook. It is a sad place.
I can think of games where there's been attempts to make lower level foes that might be mooks into something a little more dangerous. I know various iterations of the Warhammer 40k RPGs have things like squad rules and horde rules that showed up in a few games, where instead of fighting one mook, you're fighting a whole group of them as which is the stats of a single entity, and which can actually combine their attacks for something resembling a threat.
Yeah, and that's sort of one of the first elements I sort of would want to get to is how to handle a mook, or a deliberately designed mook, versus a monster that just, or nobody gang member or whatever, who just happens to be disposable because of the fight layout and how competent your starting level PCs are. Does your game have the mechanics to make the mooks easy to use or effective to use, or either or both? I would call this sort of the ganging up versus crit fishing way, where one RPG might have a specific thing where, these 20 guys come together to count as one level 10 bad guy, and as a single blow of your sword will fell 3 of them, but then the others will come in and stab your kidneys. They get bonuses to hit because there's so many of them, and bonuses damage because of their many, many tiny knives. And you'll have this sort of essentially way to template out a certain number of random dudes as something resembling a threat, and then inevitably the whole system has to be overly complicated because how do they interact with fireballs, how do they interact with mind control spells, and so on and so forth. Versus the other system, which I just set in 10 guys, and I just throw a bucket of dice at the table, and none of them look like they're 20s. Let's say that's their effect, which is an approach, but you'd want to have methods of, like, if you're the type of very slow, methodical dice roller to whom you must roll a single d20 at one time, and then you must carefully put the d20 to one side and bring out your damage dice and roll those and interpret those results. I would not recommend you then DM a game where you use a lot of mooks. I think the time of your players is somewhat precious, and having horde upon horde of bad guys would not be recommended in such a situation.
If you're going to mechanically do mooks, okay, they're meant to die a lot, number one.
Mm-hmm.
They are ultimately fodder that you chew through very quickly. And the last thing you want to deal with mooks is someone who is not a threat but takes ages to kill. Now, I can talk about games that handle this reasonably well. 4th edition D&D they had their kind of minion rules or mook rules, and their whole thing was they have 1 hit point, so any successful attack kills them, but they don't take, I think it was that if they successfully saved against a half damage effect, they took no damage.
Yeah.
To try and keep, because otherwise it was like, well, save for half, you're dead, either way. And that was these guys are kind of a threat, but they're very easy to kill. Which can be interesting if they are kind of a threat. Like the true mook that is no threat is filler. It's kind of chuffa that you just throw out there to fight to bulk out your table a bit. The best mooks are enough of a threat that they are worth killing, but they're easy to kill. So players can kind of go, right, well, I'm going to deal with that. Like, have you ever played Soulbound for Warhammer Age of Sigmar?
No. I've seen the 40k version, but
they have basically guys with wounds and without wounds, and the guys with wounds basically usually take a success to kill or very little success to damage. So they often have like one wound, so they're really easy to kill. But you might have something like a sorcerer's coterie of Sinch, and there'll be the GM can put down 20 of them, and if they get a turn, they're going to bolt you off the table because each one gets a bonus based on the number of other ones around it. But they're really easy to kill if you've got an AoE. You just basically, I target that zone, I do 1 damage to everything in that zone. Oh, look, they're all dead. And then they become a particular problem that one type of player might be good at dealing with. So, hey, wizard, can you fireball that area and kill them all, please, before they shoot us to death? And that's interesting. So I think a mook should be either not dangerous to you, really, but takes a while to beat, which is kind of like a tank or a bruiser, or they should be a little dangerous to you, particularly in numbers, but easy to kill. So it's about a priority. Let's clear out the mooks first, then let's fight the boss. And that is often more narratively satisfying for the GM if the boss is the guy that goes down last. So mooks are dangerous enough that they are worth clearing away, and then you fight the boss. Like, you can do other things like infinitely spawning mooks, but that's actually just kind of tedious. You want them to be, you can do waves of mooks, and I would advise waves of mooks often, but not infinitely spawning. Don't make people feel like there's no point. Like, just there's 3 waves of mooks going to come in, because that way you can't just take them all out one AoE. You got to be, we got to space out my AoEs a little bit. I go by fireball, you know.
Just to be contrary, I do remember an example from the Epic Level Handbook from 3rd edition D&D, where an example scenario is, an epic level character can be holding off an infinite wave of enemies, while the rest of the party take care of a lock through for a door they have to get through, or they could be the one dealing with the ridiculously complicated lock while the others are desperately holding off said infinite horde. There is a time or condition on it in that scenario.
Yeah,
it's not just infinite.
Yeah, but in that case, they're more like terrain that has hit points than they are, enemies in the traditional sense. You're not trying to kill the priority ones, interdict the ones you don't want to deal with, and then go for your objective. You're just sort of having to make, instead of skill checks to get over climb a cliff, you have attack checks to stop the horde of mooks from doing insignificant damage to you that adds up over time. So yeah, that's a way to do it, but I wouldn't say it's the traditional definition of mook. That's, as I say, more like a special scenario. I guess part of the thing is the example you gave is in the epic level handbook. It's the idea of these like level 25 guys who have supreme cleave or something, so like they can kill everyone within a move action of them in a single swing. Essentially, well, it's an awful lot more dice rolling a third ed than just a single swing, but it's essentially one turn. They just sort of move 30 feet and everything within reach of them dies. That's a epic level thing, whereas you roll back to, say, your first level guys. In a lot of games, there's often not a huge difference between the average Joe Schmo on the street of your horrible medieval town or cyberpunk dystopia, and the player characters. And the point of having a combat mook, as we'll call them, is that you have people that the players can use their combat skills on and, sort of practice their abilities on. And the point is to be effective, but without being completely overwhelmed by equivalent level opponents. But if you have a game like, say, a Wolfrup, for example, where the difference between, or even something like Third Ed D&D, where the difference between your first level fighter and your first level guy with a sharp stick maybe isn't that much numbers. It might just be a couple of proficiencies. That's sort of the issue. Is like, as we said, the previous episode we've done on power scaling, it sort of feeds back into that. It's just like, are mooks something that you should be expecting from the start of your game, or are they something that you sort of introduce later once your random guys in the street have leveled up a few times and turned into the Conans and the Elrics, and are now it makes sense for them to be able to carve through legions? That's sort of a design issue. It's the thing, and I mean, I don't want to. We harp on D&D a lot for obvious reasons, but any game that hasn't maybe been designed so much as aspired to, it could be a little hard for them to. I mean, I don't think if D&D's ever had any what we would call only fourth ed really had mook rules in the main book. Third ed eventually had a sort of toolkit for making like your pitchfork wielding mob in like the Dungeon Master's Guide 2. But there's nothing like that for fifth ed except for the swarm rules. And there's no rules for taking, they're level 10 now, so now instead of orcs we have swarm of orcs. There's no real way to do that except trial and error with rules and homebrew essentially.
I mean, yeah, but the thing is, if you're going to include mooks, things like troop rules, which you'll get in Pathfinder, you'll get in various flavors of D&D, you'll get in certain types of, like Wrath and Glory does them, and a couple of places that kind of, make them into a troop where these guys are not a threat 101, but 50 Gretchen in a group is a threat. That's your fix for, I'm still able to include these guys, but you've now scaled up to the point where a single one is not a threat, so I must include large numbers of them, which is a decent world building fix. Some people don't like it because they feel it's kind of artificial. Can we form a troop as well? I'm like, yeah, you probably could if you really wanted to. If you want only one of you getting to have an action.
Yeah, the action economy wouldn't really be worth it, like, for them. I am thinking though, there's other ways to handle mooks. There for from the GM side or in world. You could try buffing them depending on your system. A bard or another spellcaster could affect a whole mess of smaller foes, giving them pluses to hit or damage or special effects or coordinating attacks. All sorts of fun little things that make those individually, minor threats a lot more of an issue.
Although, you want to make sure it's not something that your wizard, the party wizard, will then turn around and apply to all the party members.
But again, action economy.
Maybe. I mean, there is also the question of like, what about when the PCs want to use mooks? And this is one of those things where if you're in a certain genre, such as say a Wolfrup or another low fantasy game, where it would make sense, in universe for these stalwart heroes to lead squads of pikemen or whatever. But inevitably, because of the way our games are designed with the sort of power scaling, often such ads or allies just become a liability, and players will often find themselves, instead of what in genre they should be using these guys as support and human shields and such. You'll often see a more modern heroic player going, "No, I jump in front of the fireball to save my my group of nobodies," because that's what a hero would do.
There's two types of player there. There's the player who likes collecting friends and will feel really sad when the fireball kills his horse, his Pokemon, the 4 orphans he was leading back to their mother, a mother he was leading back to their 4 orphans, and so on. They all died with a single fireball. That person will feel sad. And you as the GM probably owe it to that person to give them an option to keep that baggage train of weaklings out of trouble. The other type of person is, the kind of person who who will conquer a dungeon by feeding it one mook at a time, one orc at a time into the traps to see what they do. I've had that player, and it's not great feeling. You feel like you're basically directing a movie about a bullet. But yeah, I think it's two types of player there, and you've got to give non-competence should have the option of getting out of the way without you being extraordinarily punitive on the player for having to keep these people alive. Putting them in danger occasionally is fine. Him constantly having to hurl himself in the way of fireballs or protect them, spend everything protecting them, is just going to be a drag. You don't want that. Like, I protected a baggage train of refugees at one point. It was no fun because they die so easy.
Glass cannon doesn't even cover, or like glass toothpicks.
Yeah.
Things like critical hits can make quite a difference, though. Systems where critical hits can be done by mooks, because again, some systems only allow critical hits or their equivalent by the heroes or by the heroes and major NPCs. It gives quite a different flavor.
Unfortunately, not all games give their GMs tools to really adjust these levers, as it were. I mean, not all of them could really, but it would certainly be nice if more games would broadcast what mook rules they have, and I'm not saying partly mechanically, but like as in the tone of, oh yes, when you're level 1, you are the same as Jimmy has a knife in the back alley, but at level 10, you're expected to be mowing through hundreds. And your army is supposed to be dying around you in glorious combat and, going to Valhalla and such. But is it okay to discover this in gameplay?
That other people are super fragile. You can do it once or twice. After that, it starts getting mean. I mean, it comes down to some people have a very strong impulse to protect the weak, and you'll really, really frustrate them if characters like NPCs who are kind of under their protection keep getting killed. They will get very annoyed, and they may take actions that you suddenly feel are, whoa, that's a bit disproportionate, isn't it? And they're like, nope. I think it's one to be careful about. You got to check your players and see what the stimulus for the players are. Do they have a rage thing that will you set them off by killing people in front of them?
Possibly a content warning kind of situation.
Yeah, well, no, you just have to be careful about it, because if you will trigger odd responses, you may trigger a disproportionate response. You may trigger someone going John Wick on a city, and suddenly the campaign is this person going, "Oh, you want to see what happens when a bunch of weak people get killed, huh? Well, let's send everyone away. I'm going to kill everyone in this city." You can't fight a city. Oh, if you look at those mechanics for Mooks, I think you'll find I can. And I mean, have you ever had a player go John Wick on a city, like start tearing through the place?
I've had situations where it was very clear that if the players did decide to be violent for the city, the odds were overwhelming in their favor. I don't know if I seen them actually do it, but they were secure in the notion that they could if they desired.
Like, I've seen a player go, I may just solo this city. And basically, because the Crown Guard can't stop him, and the Royal Guard can't stop him, nobody can stop him. So he's just going to start killing people, And they're fed up with this conspiracy. They're fed up with all this messing around. I've had it up to here with this lot. I'm just gonna flatten this place. And guy goes full Conan on the place. I'm talking Marvel Comics Conan, not novel Conan. Marvel Comics Conan. And then the Mook rules cut you the other way. You suddenly got to invent a bunch of level 15 NPCs that have not been employed before this point.
I know where the city was being conquered by goblins before, but now that someone is actually starting to stab the king, well, now is when the Avengers come out of the woodwork. Their +5 swords, and
that might be because they cause so much collateral damage that you only bring them out when the city's half ruined anyway.
Maybe, but it is one of those things where you are actually going to have to sort of engage with a tone shift as how cheap is life really. Where, like, what level is a town guard versus what level is a royal guard versus what level is the king and his court wizard and his mate the ranger, as usual, many of these things aren't a problem if you've already thought about them beforehand, or the game has been kind enough to get you thinking about them and designing, a coherent setting beforehand. But if it just kind of sneaks up on you because you went into the dungeon at level 1, mechanics said that you come out of the dungeon at level 5, and you just go back to the city to restock, sell your loot, and random encounters say, oh, you get mugged in the street, and then a section later, the entire thief guild is on fire. It's a little bit an even more violent version of the scouring of the Shire, where you've come back from the war zone, and it's not so much that you're disconnected from reality, is that reality is but dust beneath your feet.
Yeah, if you're coming back as level whatever heroes and everyone else at home is effectively mooks, well,
I don't want to recommend this process because people quite rightly point out at the time is it can be incredibly time consuming to micromanaging the levels of every significant person, every city and every village and temples you come. But Third Ed's town description session did sort of prime a GM to think, well, there should probably be some decently level people in charge of things. And, earlier monster manuals might have said, oh, Bandit Kings are level 8 and they have 50% chance of having a cleric and a 10% chance of having a monk or something, as backup. But not every game could do that. And so there becomes this weird disconnect where leveling outside of what we might call the society level sort of happens. And that's kind of when you get this the changeover from a group of players as the local heroes of the world, and they have to, just because of mechanical necessity, turn into they wander around the wilderness, murder hobos is the derogatory term. But the problem is, if they ever settle down, they sort of instantly become kings of all they survey just because of how powerful they are, and that can seem a little weird. I guess what we're talking about is a sort of world building versus mechanics building disconnect, and it's something that can obviously be overcome if you put a little bit of thought in it, but not every game system does, and sometimes you just get to say, well, do it so that it makes sense, and that's sort of non-advice.
I mean, I think one other thing you can do with Mooks, which is kind of related to that, is you could always have them beg for their lives, which is kind of a different sort of encounter, and which can muck with people a little bit. If someone throws down a sword and goes, "I can't stop you, please have mercy, have mercy," I just let me go, man. I'm not a bad dude. I just had to join up with this stuff. Please, please, I have children. The full Austin Powers bit,
Yeah.
I mean, that's often a difficult challenge for players. Like, well, okay, they've totally surrendered at this point, and do we let them go? Do we tie them up? Do we take them prisoner? What do we do to all these people? And the paladin's like, oh, geez, we're in trouble here now. Ooh. I had stand your ground legislation to basically stand behind, but now I got nothing. I'm not allowed to kill these people anymore. And in fact, I may need to take care of them. I may not be able to just go, okay, you're dead. So, I mean, I think there's stuff you could do with them. There's comedy to be mined as well. The truly incompetent foe who cannot defeat you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. It's just, again, it's one of those genre things where there's obviously nothing wrong with a little bit of levity coming into a game now and again, but there is such a thing as sort of controlling the tone of your game, and accidental comedy can be fun, but it can also sort of, like, if you're really going for that sort of serious or grim dark tone, and then all of a sudden it falls into parody. eh, it can be cool, but it can also sort of chip away at the believability of your game.
They may also try to adopt the thing,
Yeah.
despite how suitable or lack thereof it is for adoption. Who's going to walk the goblins, guys? Who's going to walk the goblin?
Yeah, who's going to walk the goblins, and well, how good are they at dodging fireballs?
Oh, anyway, I mean, on the other end of the scale, you can have players getting into the domain and warfare game, which was a classic of high level old school games. You get your keep. Well, you get your own mooks, hundreds, thousands of them even. You have to feed and clothe them and whatnot, but whatever. Like, you've got an army.
Absolutely, and that's sort of the element where being able to abstract the random guys with spears and bring it from we will roll individually 100 dice for 100 spearmen, and all the 17s and higher will cause chip damage. Whereas you probably want us to turn it to army units, and then you're having there's a whole other episode on how to turn your high level one-on-one duelist dungeon crackers into also become 40k like hero units, where in theory the chapter master of the ultramarine should be on a battle barge 4 million kilometers away directing the battle with STC powered logistics computers, but no, he's right there in the middle of the fight smashing people with his gigantic machine gun fists.
Those are relics of Rebute Gulaman, I'll have you know, sir. And the Codex does sanction that action.
But because people want to be engaged in the activity on the table, that means they have to be engaged with the war game or Dominion game as well. And that's an entire other episode of possibly done before. And I don't think we've done that before. Like, there is this sort of solution to the murder hobo itinerant thing where the player character group becomes more connected to the world and the factions involved and all the many, many people that make up the setting that they're in. That's what a lot of GMs will aim for, is to have that sort of interaction happening and the players getting invested in using their lesser agents or their armies or whatever have you. But not all games make the transition all that well. There's some that make the try, and if you have good Mook rules, do you stat out your army of bureaucrats to add into a mob, a coherent unit of bureaucrats for part of your bureaucrat battle, the same way you do with spearmen on a physical battle? Maybe that. I mean, I think some games that might work.
It should be done based on the basis of, is there a danger the players are going to attempt to go combat on everybody? And you should be perfectly happy with Mooks going, yeah, this fight is not a challenge. I'm not drawing out a battle map for this. You kill them all. Or you do whatever you want to them. They are not a challenge. And that is a fine function on Mooks. Not everybody needs to be a combat appropriate challenge. And you weaken your game by doing combats where it's a box ticking exercise,
Yeah, it's rolling dice for the sake of rolling dice.
Your combats should have a function, or they should be a test on some level of the players, and there should be a chance, however small, of defeat. I'm not saying defeat ends the game or anything, but there should be a chance of defeat or setback. And Mooks typically are not a major force of opposition. That's what it comes into.
Yeah, I think that is part of the problem, is because in universe the Mooks are trying to win, but mechanically they're more like a skill test or a resource tax. So there's a bit of disconnect there.
I will say RPGs drastically underrate how bad being outnumbered in a fight is. RPG players have a lot of sympathies for the World War II German army because they're like, but those guys had the best tanks. They should have won, right? Yeah, the other guys had 10 tanks for every one of their tanks. But a good quality tank will kill hundreds of lower quality tanks.
That's not how it works.
No, it will not. How did the Allies win? We drowned them with our dead. We drowned them with numbers. We did not beat them by having the better weapons. We had more of them. That was the trick. Out industrial production, we just make more tanks. We make 10 tanks for every tank you have. It doesn't matter if you blow up 3 or 4 tanks each. And that players can find hard to deal with. Players don't necessarily like losing fights to Mooks.
I mean, yeah, that's absolutely true. But it's like, part of the issue is that, see previous issues on the gentle art of running away. An awful lot of times, players will not think of the poor GM and his legions of Mooks wanting to live to see another day. They're thinking of, if we lose any battle, even slightly, that means not only are we dead, but whatever world-ending threat that only we can solve, that will destroy the universe. Because they are the protagonists, they will automatically assume that knocking them out, dragging them away to a jail cell is the equivalent of deploying the Death Star. Obviously, there are ways to get around that, and if you've set up your premise correctly. But we're sort of talking about the generic system where maybe the generic system hasn't communicated this well enough, or it communicated it at level 1 and now they've gone to level 3 and all of a sudden, like at level 1 there was a chance that a random ogre would just splat a wizard in a single blow, and now they fall like weak just because of scaling. I mean, I've often thought that the traditional level 1 to level whatever thing should really have, because I do believe that a starting PC should be noticeably above the average Joe on the street, at the very least in their element of expertise. But I also think that level scaling goes too far. So I feel like we should have tilt the power scaling so that people start stronger but do not get as strong quickly. But that's an aspiration I have. I can't really apply it to the average game without basically rewriting it.
Yeah, like recently I ran a Low Life 2090 campaign, OSR 5e hybrid. And yeah, much like what you say, characters start a bit stronger, but don't get their hit. They gain 1 hit point a level. It like while still a leveled system.
Mm.
And yeah, the players all like loved the combat because it felt dangerous. Big hits were being thrown around, and 1 hit could drop a character.
One of the things I like, actually, is if you build a system with extreme scaling, you're saying something about your setting, and your setting has to reflect that. Like, for example, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, in D&D, if you have enough bowmen, you can kill a dragon. They all just shoot, and enough of them get natural 20s and hit, and the dragon will go down to enough mass bowfire. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, mass bowfire will not kill a dragon. Low-level PCs cannot hurt a dragon. At a high enough level dragon. If it's 40 AC, it's like, yeah, I rolled a 20. Yep, that's not good enough. It's still a critical miss. And that says something about your setting. And you can look at settings that have narratives about them. Like if you read the Malazan Books of the Fallen, which is a very peculiar experience if you do it, but they have concepts in that. Like there are characters who are just like, no, these guys are just ludicrously high leveled. They're ridiculous, and no amount of mooks are going to stop them. But they still have armies in it, and the armies do different things than the thing. They have a whole thing of one of the things the Empire did was they basically made super powerful elite champions, the first swords. And the first swords, what they did was they tricked other empires into trying to build various superpowered guys to fight back against them. And in the end, no one could beat the first swords. The first swords kind of all the magic and resource power is going to making these guys. The first swords fight those and kill them, and the armies clean up the rest. And it was like, okay, no one can fight the Malazans like this because they're too good at playing that game. And that does interesting stuff about your setting when player characters are required, because high level adventurers are required to handle certain threats. They cannot be handled with an army. They must be handled with adventurers. That changes something about your setting. And it makes adventurers mandatory despite their peculiarities and odd equipment choices and desires to spend lifetimes worth of gold outfitting a new sword. It's because, yeah, I need it. I don't, it's not an optional gewgaw or extra. This is required equipment for doing the job I'm meant to do. And for that job, I must be, homaged and dealt with and everything else like that. So if you're going to do mooks properly, you have to build it into the setting. It's not just like, oh yeah, like normally 10 guys can kill one guy, but not this guy. And it's like, okay, you need to supply a reason why in setting that it doesn't work. Like in real life, right? If a high-level criminal in Dublin knocked out 20 Gardaí and escaped from a thing, everyone would be like, what the hell just happened there? That doesn't happen. So you need to reform your world setting to explain what a super powerful NPC, what do they look like? Because they're not people anymore. They're not like you're pushing into superhero territory. You're pushing into, this person is not just a little bit faster than nobody else. He is the flash fast compared to everybody else. Like why are they so unkillable? And just, oh no, you're just a little bit better fighter. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. You're significantly better as a fighter. You're a completely different class of fighter. You have a fighter that's never darkened the real world, and that's part of the setting.
Yeah, that's one of the things where D&D having its massive monster manual, some GMs would look at this and say, oh, this is just a shopping list. I can just pick this, and this, and run a campaign about it. It's fine. But actually, one of the major things about having the monster manual not just selection, but also scaling. So you can start off with the goblins being mooks, and level up to the ogres being the mooks. And now we're level 14 taking on the Hall of Fire Giant King, and now Fire Giants are mooks. That's the advantage there of having so many options in the monster manual, is that you can level your setting is leveling up as well at the same time as your players are. And the desired outcome is that players start off in a tiny little village where there's like 2 town guards and they're level 0 guys with rusty knives, and they go to the moderate city after a few dungeons, and the moderate city has like level 2 guards with a couple of level 5 lieutenants and a level 3 wizard as backup. And then they go to the super big city where there's like level 5 guards and level 10 lieutenants, and they have packs of fire breathing dogs from another dimension. And then they go up and they go to Sigil, where I don't even want to get into the nonsense there is in Sigil, because there's basically a sub-cities for every faction, each with their own nonsenses, and they can have literally anything from anywhere on the plains. And so you don't fall into this problem, because every time you've out-leveled the Mooks 1 area, the expectation is that, well, that means that a greater adventure lies in another area and you can move to there. And that means that when you are a GM who isn't interested in anything more complicated than Dirt Farmer Town in the middle of nowhere, all of a sudden, because you have the mechanics for the eternal growth of a player character party into obscene levels, but you don't have escalating world to go with it, that means that the players end up leaving the world behind, and that's where you get your disconnect. That is, again, one of those things where it's not like it's hidden in the game, but like the Dungeon Master guides rarely point this out as a thing you have to, because DMGs are always written like, oh, you could do anything, you could design any kind of setting you want, please, by all means, spend hours writing out completely mundane cities of random human nobles squabbling over river rights and the price of iron ore, and then have this bunch of overleveled aliens from the Feywild just kind of roll in and start having arguments and disagreeing with the idea of personal property and so on and so forth. So I think I may have ranted about the entire concept of RPGs there for a minute, but
yeah, you're entitled though.
That is in fact why we have this podcast, and why you, the good listeners, keep listening to us.
Any more thoughts to round off on that? The concept of Mooks?
No, I think we've covered a decent amount of that one. If you consider yourself a Mook, gentle listener, why not come and explain your value to us on our Discord, or contact us on our social medias, or shout at us via SpeechPipe.
And if enough of you come together, you can form into a class 3 mob, and you can take on even level 5 podcasters.
And with that, this party is over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account @AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike on Version 3 license.